West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
All right, good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with Russia and neighboring Ukraine on the brink of war, with Vladimir Putin ordering Russian troops into two Moscow-backed breakaway regions within eastern Ukraine. That after Putin announced he would formally recognize the independence of those regions where Russia has been supporting armed separatists in an 8-year conflict. Putin addressed Russia today in an hour-long, rambling, made-for-television speech filled with grievances, while offering what many experts call a false interpretation of history. Sound familiar? Putin claimed, and we are translating this from Russian, that Ukraine is a historical part of Russia that was illegitimately taken from Moscow and is now run by a puppet regime controlled by the U.S. and the West. Ukraine has never had traditions of its own statehood, according to Putin, calling the eastern part of Ukraine ancient Russian lands. The remarks coming from a dangerous, paranoid man who honestly came across as also unsound, further stoked fears that Putin is looking to reacquire all of Ukraine. Part of his master plan to claw his way back to the time of Mother Russia before the fall of the Soviet Union, before the loss of the states that once made up the USSR. A change that, by the way, was primarily led by the 1991 exit of Ukraine from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Almost immediately, the White House announced that Biden signed an executive order prohibiting new investment, trade, and financing by U.S. persons to, from, or in the so-called DNR and LNR regions. Germany and the UK announced that they would follow suit. The UN Security Council will meet later tonight to discuss the situation in Ukraine. And joining me now from Moscow is NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons. From Kyiv, NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin. And also joining me, Masha Gessen, staff writer for The New Yorker and author of Surviving Autocracy. Thank you all for being here. So let's just go around the sort of horn here. I'm going to start with you, Keir. Give us kind of the sense, because this has gotten as serious as it gets. What's your sense from where you are?
Yeah, it's pretty serious, Joy. I mean, the Interfax news agency, that Russian news agency, now reporting that two large military columns are in Donetsk, that separatist region in eastern Ukraine, with armored vehicles. The reports that Russia is already sending peacekeepers, in inverted commas, into that area of eastern Ukraine. So, I mean, you could call that an invasion. I mean, it's open Russian military forces going into eastern Ukraine. Today, President Putin recognized those separatist regions of eastern Ukraine, but with his military there now, and even with the treaties he signed, Joy, including agreements for the Russians to build military bases in eastern Ukraine, well, you could call that too an annexation. It rips up the Minsk agreement, that peace deal that they reached back in 2014. That deal has been very difficult to implement on both sides, but that's done for, that's over. And I think one of the things you can really say about that performance by President Putin on Russian television is that's not a man who's scared. He was sitting back. He looked frankly relaxed and angry and ranting. He didn't have notes. As you say, he spoke for a minute. He didn't seem frightened by the potential for sanctions. And now the real question is, what will the sanctions be? Because here's another point. Just a year ago, for example, the idea of Russian troops openly going into eastern Ukraine, well, that would have been enough to bring the West heavily down on Moscow. But is that what we're going to see? Because this isn't as much as the West had feared. What will happen next is another question. But again, President Putin, his inner core, if you like, these are people who are already sanctioned, who can't leave Russia, and they are not acting like they are frightened by anything that's been threatened so far.
Well, and Aaron, let me bring you in on this because, right, I mean, the point is that, there are things that it seems that Putin has done to sort of build up enough sort of reserves in case the sanctions happen. Let's just look at some of the options that are there. There's the option to cut Russia off from Society for Worldwide Interbank, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications called SWIFT, ban sales of sovereign bonds, limit access to U.S.-made technology, freeze their assets of high-ranking Russian officials. There are things that they could, that could be done. It looks like sanctions will happen. But if they're lying enough about what's happening in Ukraine to claim that they need to send in peacekeeping forces when there is nothing to send peacekeeping forces for, creating just a false pretext, then all of this sort of weird historical layering to try to make an excuse for doing this, I do wonder, what is the thinking about how effective sanctions would be and how extreme would they need to be in order to make a difference?
Well, very effective. If you speak to Ukrainian officials, they've been calling for sanctions for some time now. Most recently in Munich, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky calling on world leaders to issue sanctions, then saying, what are you waiting for if you're so sure that Russia is going to invade? And we're yet to hear from the Ukrainian president following this latest move from the Kremlin. He is expected to speak tonight. It's 2 a.m. in the middle of the night, and yet any minute now he could address the country in what will arguably be one of the most important speeches of his entire career. One of the big overhanging questions in all of this is how will the Ukrainian military respond, especially if these Russian peacekeepers move into separatist-controlled areas and push past the line of contact. So far, the Ukrainian military have been ordered to exercise restraint, not to provoke the situation, with President Zelensky saying that one cannon fire, one artillery round could spark a greater war. Now, in terms of his speech tonight, we do expect for him to try and maintain a sense of calm. It's something that he has been trying to do for weeks now, saying that panic is an enemy of Ukraine. But I can tell you, I have been speaking to Ukrainians and they're extremely concerned. I was speaking to one former advisor to President Zelensky who told me he feels like today is 1939 all over again. And he said that listening to President Putin in that hour-long address earlier today, he said that it's very clear to him that President Putin wants to take the whole of Ukraine. That is the feeling that some really key officials here in Kyiv, that's how they feel tonight. Joy.
And I will just note that it does appear that President Zelensky has spoken, or he's beginning to speak now. So he's doing that as we speak. And I know that you'll be going back and covering whatever it is he says. But he has essentially said that the incursions already into eastern Ukraine are completely unacceptable. Masha, let me bring you in here because it felt unhinged. It may not have seemed like a fearful leader of a country that wants to be sort of top dog on the world stage, equal to the United States, but it definitely sounded paranoid. It was a full redress of old grievances and this longing to bring Ukraine back inside of, I guess, a sort of recreated old USSR. It didn't sound hinged, but what do you make of that? And the fact that this man does appear to be ignoring the entire world's admonitions to not do this and threats of sanctions, and seems to be doing it anyway.
Well, the most important thing that Putin said today actually wasn't that Ukraine is historically part of Russia. The most important thing he said today was that the entire body of laws on which the dissolution of the Soviet Union was based was illegitimate. He basically has canceled Russia's recognition of the post-Soviet geography. And that is a threat not only against Ukraine, that is a threat actually against every country that used to be part of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. That includes Finland, that includes the Baltic states, but most immediately it includes Ukraine. So that's the most important thing. No, he didn't sound pure. He sounded resolved, and he sounded like he was announcing to the world that the entire post-Cold War order has been canceled. The other thing that he has been saying before, and that he said today during the, indicated today during the fake live broadcast of the Russian Security Council, was that they're basically trying to create a kind of caricature of the air war in Kosovo in 1999. They're laying down the pretext for claiming that in these so-called breakaway regions, because they're not actually so-called breakaway regions, and they're not actually run by Russian backed separatists. They're actually Russian-occupied, Russian-controlled fake separatist regions. So in these so-called breakaway regions, he's claiming that there's discrimination against Russians, that there's systematic violence against ethnic Russians and Russian speakers in Ukraine. They're throwing around the word genocide. And what they're preparing the ground for is airstrikes against Kiev and installing a puppet government in Kiev, which I'm afraid Putin imagines will be easy to do.
He imagines it'll be easier to do, but imagining and doing it are two different things. I mean, do you have the sense in studying what Russia is now that they would have the military capability to restore, to do what it is that he claims to want to do? Because that seems beyond the normal sort of capabilities of a country like Russia. But is that something that even is feasible? Because that sounds like madness.
I think Putin actually has a very good idea of what his military is capable of. What he doesn't have the imagination for is the Ukrainian population. He doesn't understand that he's talking about a country that has true civic cohesion, where people have actually sacrificed their lives and are fully aware that more than 100 people died during the Revolution of Dignity in 2013, 2014, to secure free and open elections. People will stand to the last in Ukraine. This is also a country that has been partially occupied by Russia for the last 8 years. It has had a shooting war, a hot war, for the last 8 years that daily claims casualties. So this is a mobilized, resolved nation. This is a nation where even 8 years ago, students, people I knew because they were postdocs, I knew them through academic circles, volunteered to go fight against Russia in the East. This is a country that will not tolerate the installation of a puppet government, and that's something that Putin simply cannot imagine. He is used to dealing with his own country.
It is Tuesday, the 22nd of February of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner is our English bulldog and our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special, of course, is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. Should try it. Just a pinch. A dash. So it is Tuesday, the day after President's Day, and as far as I can tell, we're not vaporized in any kind of nuclear conflagration yet. You never know. So, because, what is reality except little snippets of time strung together that gives us a sense of, well, I don't know, longevity. Whatever. So Vladimir Putin's still out there rattling the sabers to the point where he's actually putting military boots on the ground in another country. Oh, I know he signed an order that said, oh, that's not Ukraine, and Ukraine never existed anyway. What? Talk about Big Brother gaslighting us all, because that was a worldwide broadcast, by the way. And Ukraine is not any small feature on the map. Let's just put it another way. They have, I think, some sizable amount of what was the Soviet Union's population when Ukraine was, well, shall we say, a part of the old Soviet Union. Some say, well, Ukraine was made into a country by Stalin. I think that there's quite a bit more, shall we put it, national identity for that region than the Soviet Union or even the Tsar. Yeah. A lot of people saying, wow, that guy, Putin, he's starting to act like Stalin. I'm saying, no, he's acting like Peter the Great. Come on. Stalin, small potatoes. We're talking Peter the Great. I will just make whatever it is I want, and it will be. Because he's a sovereign. He knows better. Kind of makes you want to read those translator notes from Helsinki now, doesn't it? Huh? Yeah, it does. Well, there's a possibility that we could be sucked into a world war. It happened on a lot less impetus, say like World War One. Not to say that a couple of royals or royal and his wife getting gunned down. I mean, that's tragic in its own way. Look, I didn't want George Wallace getting shot. I don't like that kind of government, to be honest with you. And I know Bremer didn't shoot him because he was some wild-eyed liberal. Okay, Bremer was not shooting George Wallace because George Wallace was a racist pig. But regardless, I don't like my government run around by the point of a gun. And that's exactly what Putin wants. He's a mobster. So the sanctions that we could put on Russia would not impact Vladimir Putin one bit. Not for a while. I mean, we got to remember, even though the reason it won't impact him is he can just dip into the Russian treasury anytime he wants, but it's still only the size of Italy, which is actually, I think, is less than Italy now. It's not even close to California, and California is a lot more than Italy. So think of it that way. On the other hand, as far as I know, Newsom doesn't have a nuclear stockpile that he can just lob at people either. Maybe. There is Edwards Air Force Base. Maybe they got him there. I don't know. But Gavin doesn't have access to them. Let's just put it that way. But in terms of economy, we could wait the guy out. We could embargo the guy. But where it will really hurt in a more immediate fashion, and even that's not immediate, though I have some plans for some immediate pain upon the Russian oligarchs, and that's who I'm talking about. Once their assets, once their money stream gets impacted, they're going to start going to Vlad saying, hey, look, we've been kicking a lot of stuff up to you. How about, you said you're the Don. Come on, go protect our interests. Once that happens, then we might have a bit more sway without firing the shot. On the other hand, these Russian oligarchs are not pacifists either. But what do I have in mind in terms of some immediate pain that these oligarchs might experience because of the government that they are a part of, because they're mobsters in their own right? Well, I counted 20 yachts from Russian oligarchs that were suddenly taken out of Russia, and we know where they are because they have to fly a flag. That's 20 oligarchs. And I made sure they weren't like an oligarch owned like a bunch of yachts. These are like mega yachts. These are insane. How is it that a country with a GDP of a little less than Italy, of course, on the other hand, look at the yachts in Italy, but anyway, how is it that a mob government like Russia with a GDP of a little less than Italy these oligarchs, I don't know what else to call them, because, they have franchises to make a bunch of money off the backs of the Russian people. I guess the Russian people don't know. These things are like monster yachts. Mega yachts doesn't even begin to describe it. Monster, I don't know either. They're just huge. But 20 oligarchs could feel some immediate, I don't know. I'm sure that if they took the effort to get their yachts out of Russia so they wouldn't be embargoed, I think that they would probably say, wait. All right, that's my plan. We could put it into effect because there is a clear and present danger, and I've seen all of these spy movies and I've read the novels. I just wish that more people would. Apparently, we're not a reading country. I saw that apparently the reading level of the United States currently is a little less than the 6th grade. And I'm not talking about us who were advanced in 6th grade and were reading on a high school level or more. I'm talking about 6th grade. I don't know, what are we reading in 6th grade? We weren't even reading The Yearling in 6th grade, I don't think. I did, because it was in the stacks at home. We had stacks and stacks of books. And when you're up in the woods, snowed in, you might pick up a book and stuff. I didn't feel socially stunted by doing that either, by the way. There were times in the Cascades, just to go off on a tangent, where we were snowed in for a considerable time. And I don't know, did we blame the Democratic governor? No, because it wasn't a Democratic governor then. That was Hatfield. He was a Republican. But everybody wants to blame the Democrat for everything that is happening now. Oh, I got to wear a mask and I can't go to school. I can't get these kids out of my hair. That's really what it's about. This parent movement is more about getting their kids out of their hair because they cannot stand what the teachers have to put up with every day. Parent goes, Jesus, get these kids in school. Can't stand this. But when we lived in the Cascades, there were times that you couldn't get to school because you were snowed in. And we had some considerable snowstorms, blizzards. And why not pick up a book? So we had stacks of books. And yeah, I read The Yearling, I think 4th grade, actually. So maybe Treasure Island. Treasure Island might be a good 6th grade book for a 6th grader to read. But they can't read that because they're barely competent to be able to do it. And when I say they, I mean, full-grown adults going to school board meetings and screaming that they don't want their kids reading these kinds of books because they might get programmed. Well, I don't know what happened to you. You got programmed without reading the book, didn't you? And where did the programming come from? Well, I'm telling you, and I'll keep repeating this until, I don't know, the pigs come home. 73 million people are on the side of Vlad pretty much right now because they get their marching orders from Fox News. Why is this treasonous propaganda outlet allowed to spew their lies and hate? And treasonous opinions, yeah. I don't know. They got a free speech right to that? I don't think so. Vladimir Putin is a hostile foreign power. You take sides with that person, what does that make you? People still hate Jane Fonda for sitting on a Viet Cong tank, and she apologized. She apologized. She saw the, quote, error of her ways. I know what she was doing at the time. It's like, let's stop war. Let's stop war. But, it takes two sides to have a war, too. On the other hand, when you're occupied, isn't that sort of like your prime directive? Every prison movie from World War II, when you saw like the Brits and the Americans getting together, what did they do? They wanted to escape. because you don't want to be occupied and held down by a hostile foreign power. And do you think Ukraine is going to stand for that? It's not as if Ukraine doesn't have the ability to cause Vlad and his troops a little bit of pain on that level themselves. But a lot of people are going to get killed in the process. A lot of grandmas. And grandpas, too, which I'm one. I'd be right there. Oh, I'm going to go out and do the Civilian Defense Corps. Put on my little Civilian Defense Corps hat and tell people to curtain up your windows, folks. I think it's going to be a little bit more involved than that. So, yeah. I think that we have a moral obligation. I don't know if that's the proper term. I mean, yeah, I guess that would be construed as that. But we have diplomatic ties and interests in that area. And Vladimir Putin is acting as if he is a rogue agent. And the reason for that is because he is a rogue agent. He wants to arbitrarily reset national boundaries. You know, the ambassador to the UN from Kenya gave an impassioned speech and put Russia pretty much in their place. How many centuries have they just adhered to colonizers' boundaries and naming of countries because they just didn't want to have endless wars? And what is Vladimir Putin setting up? Endless wars, because I guess, you know, he's Big Brother and everybody else is Goldstein. They learn their lessons well. If only we, as a nation, could read above a 6th grade level. We might have been able to read Brave New World. People would, you know, this is more like Brave New World than Orwell anyway, but I'm just saying. We need to up our game. And there's been a concerted effort, and I don't know by who. Well, I do know by who, but why and all of this other, I can construe all of those, the answers to all of those questions. But there has been a concerted effort from some very powerful moneyed interests to make our voting public illiterate so they're easier to manipulate. I guess it's an age-old strategy. It seems to have worked down through millennia. And maybe that's why Vlad is going after Ukraine, because that was a country of serfs. That was the breadbasket of the whole area of the Soviet Union, but everybody else too. They were serfs. They were slaves. And I guess there's a natural inclination to hate those that you're able to conquest. You gotta. Otherwise, I don't know, you might have a moral problem then. An internal moral issue that comes up and it causes dissonance. And what do? I guess you lash out and put boots on the ground and mortar elementary schools with kids inside the classrooms. Can we put up with that? No. Can't have that in a civilized society, and you certainly don't want mobsters telling you what to do. You don't negotiate with mobsters. You don't negotiate with Nazis, and you don't negotiate with mobsters. You punch them, and then you punch them again, because they're not going to just take one punch. What's on the rest of the menu here at the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Oh my, we have really gone on compared to the clip there from Joy and my little bit of ranting concern. The time just flies. Well, on the rest of the menu, beekeepers are turning to anti-theft technology as hive thefts rise. Everything. You think it's just catalytic converters? Beehives, too. A former University of Delaware police officer accused the school of racial discrimination over its COVID protocols. And Federal Reserve Governor Michelle Bowman is open to lifting interest rates by more than the traditional quarter point. Looking at a half point there, folks. After the break, we move to the chef's table where world shares dropped after Putin ordered troops into those separatist regions of eastern Ukraine. And Colombia became the latest country in Latin America to expand access to abortion. You know, that's great. Let's do the United States now. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And please send us money. We need it. We pay our bills, unlike some of those people out there who defraud charities and think they can get away with it. Well, look, we have loftier ambitions than mere monetary gain. Jeez, we're not in it for the money, but we do need some funds to help us pay our bills so we can continue flying under the radar and continue this, well, powerhouse of resistance against dark forces arrayed against the United States of America and representative democracy itself. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on, how about an espresso-type coffee drink? Hey, how about that? And send those funds to us once a month. We have a track record of stretching those dollars beyond compare, paying our bills, flying under the radar, and continuing this effort of resistance as the founders originally intended so many years ago. Okay, please, and thank you. Okay, I burned up so much time on the morning rant. I shouldn't be going through all of this, but I feel compelled to. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. Why? Because I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that posted up on Twitter and other social media platforms, and you know who they are. The show notes and links are a very integral and important part of this whole, salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because that's where the real reportage is. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. And the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library, including West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org, and we'll have those links more readily available across the Netroots Radio universe. All right, this first offering comes out of the Associated Press here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it is by Daisy Nguyen. For a few frenzied weeks, beekeepers from around the U.S. trucked billions of honeybees to California to rent them to almond growers who need the insects to pollinate the state's most valuable crop. But as almond trees start to bloom, blanketing entire valleys in white and pink flowers, so begin beehive thefts that have become so prevalent that beekeepers are now turning to GPS tracking devices, surveillance cameras, and other anti-theft technology to protect their precious colonies. Hive thefts have been reported elsewhere in the country. Most recently, 3 hives containing about 60,000 bees were taken from a grocery chain's garden in central Pennsylvania. They happen at a larger scale and uniquely in California this time of year because bees are most in demand during the largest pollination event in the world. In the past few weeks, 1,036 beehives worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were reported stolen from orchards nationwide, authorities said. The largest hide involved 384 beehives that were taken from a field in Mendocino County, prompting the State Beekeepers Association to offer a $10,000 reward for information leading to their recovery. It's hard to articulate how it feels to care for your hives all year, only to have them stolen from you, Claire Towser wrote on Facebook to spread the word. A tightening supply of bees and soaring pollination fees, jumping from less than $50 to rent a hive 2 decades ago to as much as $230 per hive this year, are likely motivating beekeepers to go rogue. The demand for bees has steadily risen over the last 20 years as popularity of the healthy, crunchy nut turned California into the world's biggest almond producer. Accordingly, the amount of land used to grow almonds is more than double to an estimated 1.3 million acres. And I got to tell you, when you do monocrops, that is not good. Disease and pestilence follows. Why won't people learn? Anyway, beekeepers have been keeping up with that growth by providing an ever-increasing proportion of the nation's available stock of hives. This year, a survey of commercial beekeepers estimated it will take 90% of honeybee colonies in the U.S. to pollinate all the almond orchards. Well, what about my broccoli? But bee populations are notoriously unstable due to a host of problems, including disease, loss of habitat, and insecticides, and that's what happens when you push a monocrop. Press staff bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A former University of Delaware police officer has accused the school and its police chief of racial discrimination, claiming in a federal lawsuit that he was fired after calling out his superiors for risking officers' health during the height of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. The News Journal reports that Rashawn Rich was charged with insubordination, a department disciplinary violation, when he expressed disagreement with the university's COVID-19 protocol that required officers to transport COVID-19 positive students to quarantine housing. Rich claims he was disciplined, while other white employees were not, according to the lawsuit. A university spokesperson said the school does not comment on ongoing litigation. Rich and his attorney also declined to comment. On August 30th of 2020, Rich received a dispatch call to transport a COVID-19 positive student, but he declined, citing unnecessary risk and exposure for non-law enforcement purposes. He was eventually forced to pick an officer from his squad for the transport, who reluctantly agreed, the lawsuit states. Later that night, Rich was placed on an emergency administrative leave. He was investigated by the department and ultimately terminated for insubordination. Defendant has engaged in a pattern and practice of disproportionately treating and disciplining its African American officers while failing to discipline its Caucasian officers, the lawsuit states. Christopher Rugaber of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Federal Reserve Governor Michelle Bowman said yesterday, Monday, that she was open to lifting interest rates by more than the traditional quarter point at the central bank's next meeting in March. Bowman's comments came after several officials on Friday pushed back against the idea of a half-point increase in the Fed's benchmark short-term interest rate. The Fed is looking to raise rates as inflation surged to 7.5% in January, compared with a year earlier, the biggest increase in 4 decades. The debate over how quickly to raise interest rates is being closely watched by financial markets and also could have an impact on the broader economy. Many economists have said the Fed has moved too slowly in response to an unexpectedly persistent surge in prices, raising the risk that inflation could remain high. But if it raises rates too quickly, the Fed risks choking off growth and hiring. Why don't we then go to our break, and when we come back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your Fast Track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors.
I remember you. Welcome back, Tanya.
It's great to be back, Josh. Today we're going to talk about tracking COVID through the sewers.
And explain why vaccines for the littlest kids have been put on hold yet again. There's been more talk recently about using wastewater to detect COVID. Forgive me, Tanya, but what's the poop on that?
I'm glad you asked, Josh. Scientists have known for some time that people can shed the SARS-CoV-2 virus in our excrement. Traces of virus in our sewage systems can often be detected before a surge in clinical COVID cases, so they can provide early warning of an outbreak. And they can spot infections from people regardless of whether or not they're showing symptoms or if they have access to testing. What's new is that the CDC has started adding data from wastewater sampling sites to its dashboard, the COVID Data Tracker. The agency first launched the National Wastewater Surveillance System in September of 2020. Now they have more than 400 monitoring sites around the country, and they're planning to add 250 more in the next few weeks. That's according to Amy Kirby, the program's team lead, who was speaking in a press briefing. You can look up specific U.S. counties and see where there's been an increase or decrease in SARS-CoV-2 levels in their wastewater. If a county hasn't provided data recently, it's shown in gray. Right now, there aren't that many sites that are frequently submitting data, but you can still get an idea of how cases are trending based on the colors of dots on the map. Wastewater tracking could also be useful for spotting new variants. In fact, a recent study of the sewage system in New York City found several so-called cryptic variants that were not seen in any clinical samples from patients. The researchers suggested that these could have come from an isolated setting like a nursing home, or even from animals like rats, of which there is no shortage in NYC's sewers. They found traces of rat, dog, and cat RNA in the wastewater. This adds to worries that animals could serve as a reservoir for the virus. In fact, many white-tailed deer in the U.S. have already been found to have SARS-CoV-2 antibodies. Wastewater monitoring isn't just limited to COVID, though. It could also be used to detect outbreaks of other pathogens like flu or antibiotic-resistant microbes, or even patterns of opioid use, scientists say. Our poop is a veritable goldmine. One group of people in the U.S. has not been eligible for COVID vaccines: kids under 5. Is that about to change?
Not this month, Tanya, and not next month either. The Food and Drug Administration and the vaccine maker Pfizer, which had been testing shots in the littlest children, wanted kids' vaccines to happen. So do lots of parents who have been desperate to get their little children vaccinated. There are about 18 million kids under the age of 5, and they go to daycare and nursery school and pre-K and playgroups. Vaccines have been approved for everyone aged 5 and up, but these littlest ones have been out there unprotected. The tests of these vaccines, however, were not rousing success stories. They showed the vaccines were quite safe in little kids, yet they didn't show the shots produced immunity in children aged 2 through 5. These shots, 2 of them, each smaller than the adult dose, did work in kids under age 2, including infants. They produced levels of antibodies just like the levels that stopped infection in teenagers, for instance. For the 2 and ups, Pfizer decided to add a 3rd shot to the regimen and test that, and they applied for approval for the 2-shot routine. The reasoning is that the vaccine was safe in kids, it worked in the infants, and that starting the doses now will get the older kids to their 3rd shot faster. But it's unusual to approve something when not all the data are in. That bothered some scientists on the agency's Vaccine Advisory Committee, such as vaccinologist Paul Offit of the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. He didn't want to approve a shot without seeing more evidence that it actually worked. Apparently, a number of other experts shared that sentiment. Last week, the FDA, which had encouraged Pfizer's application, suddenly reversed course. They canceled a meeting of the advisory committee that was going to review the application, saying it would be better to wait for complete 3-dose data. Pfizer agreed, and it expects that info to be available in early April. The Omicron variant played a role in this back and forth. More kids started to be hospitalized in early January than ever before, about 800 per week, and that made the agency look for ways to work fast. But the variant also infected kids in the 2-dose Pfizer trial, making the 3rd dose even more important to judge effectiveness. So officials made the decision to wait. Plus, the pace of Omicron infection has started to wane. Above all, I think, nobody wanted to seem like they were taking shortcuts when it came to kids, and moving ahead now seemed more and more like cutting corners. Some vaccine experts worried that it would raise parents' suspicions. So, now it's wait until April. That's distressing to parents who thought they'd be able to extend protection to their little ones. But it's also following the science and not getting ahead of it.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is edited by the inimitable Jeff Del Vicio.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly, and check out SciAm.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. We are joined today once again by actress and educator Vicki Ross Norris. Dr. Ross Norris, in February we are celebrating Black History Month. Why should all Americans learn about the African American experience?
There is only one race, the human race. But we're all culturally different. And such, when we learn about each other, we appreciate each other more. Every culture in America has always made contributions. And by learning about my culture, you learn about me, and you hopefully will appreciate my contributions and my forefathers' contributions to our country. Frederick Douglass said, with knowledge comes understanding. And by me allowing you to see the pie that I have created, or the slice that my people have created to add to the American apple pie, we're going to have a complete pie that we can all nourish and continue to teach our children. So by knowing about African American history, Americans chip away at the stereotypical ideas and racist ideas about a group of people who have strived to become citizens in this country since they laid their first foot upon the land. The African American has struggled and given and contributed to America when America would not acknowledge them. And that's why we want to share African American history. That was a struggle to get this month, just as it's been a struggle for Women's Month, Latino Month. And actually, we shouldn't even have to have these months. But it's necessary at this point in our culture so that we can focus on each group of people, so that we become one. And that's really what the Constitution is about, but we struggle for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross Norris. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968, and striking sanitation workers staged a sit-in at the City Council meeting in Memphis, Tennessee. The striking workers were members of AFSCME Local 1733. They had been on strike for 10 days. Their demands included union recognition, a pay increase, a grievance procedure, and end to workplace discrimination. Also at issue was workplace safety. February 1st, 1968 was a rainy day. Two black sanitation workers, Eckel Cole and Robert Walker, sought shelter from the heavy rain in the only place city rules allowed them to be, in the back of their garbage truck with the trash. Tragedy struck, and both men were crushed to death due to faulty equipment. The strike started soon after. At the City Council sit-in, hours passed with neither side backing down. As the hours wore on, the union brought in sandwiches for their members. Finally, the City Council capitulated, but the mayor of Memphis still refused to recognize the union. The sanitation workers' struggle garnered the attention of civil rights leaders, including Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King came to Memphis to support the striking workers. While on the trip, King was assassinated coming out of the Lorraine Motel. As the country mourned Dr. King's death, the strike wore on, lasting 65 days before the city settled under heavy pressure from Washington, D.C. Memphis officials met most of the strikers' demands. During the strike, the black sanitation workers carried a sign that read simply, "I am a man." Pickets with this simple, dignified, and powerful statement became one of the iconic images of the civil rights movement. The slogan is still used today at civil rights and labor marches.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We're going to skip right to Weather from Around the World, and Weather from Around the World is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 54 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 53 and cloudy. Rome is 64 and fair. Kyiv, we're still calling it Kyiv, is 48 and fair. Kabul is 36 and cloudy. Hong Kong is 47 with heavy rain showers. Tokyo is 37 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees with heavy rain. San Francisco, California is 43 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 42 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Elaine Kurtenbach of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Shares fell sharply in Asia early today after Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered troops into separatist regions of eastern Ukraine, suggesting a long-feared invasion was possibly underway. Western powers fear Russia might use skirmishes in Ukraine's eastern regions as a pretext for an attack on the democracy, which has defied Moscow's attempts to pull it back into its orbit. A vaguely worded decree signed by Putin cast the order for troops to move into eastern Ukraine as an effort to maintain peace. The White House issued an executive order to prohibit U.S. investment and trade in the separatist regions, and additional measures, likely sanctions, were to be announced a little later today. I don't think that they've actually done it at this moment. Russia is a major energy producer, and the tensions have led to extremely volatile energy prices. The tensions in Eastern Europe have added to worries over how the world's central banks, especially the U.S. Federal Reserve, will act to counter surging inflation.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Manuel Rueda of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Colombia became the latest country in Latin America to expand access to abortion as the nation's constitutional court voted to legalize the procedure until the 24th week of pregnancy. The decision by the tribunal of 9 judges fell short of the expectations of pro-choice groups that had been pushing for abortion to be completely decriminalized in Colombia, but it was nevertheless described as a historic event by women's rights groups, which estimate 400,000 women get clandestine abortions in the country each year. Before the ruling, Colombia allowed abortions only when a woman's life was in danger, a fetus had malformations, or the pregnancy was resulted from rape. Now, women in Colombia will be able to get abortions until the 24th week of their pregnancy without having to provide any justification. After the 24th week of pregnancy, abortion will still face severe restrictions. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Let's only hope that we can. And so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news about war and everything else as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.